everyone, welcome back to JP's Budget Collecting and our weekly look back at the hot comics from 6 months ago. This week we're looking back at the hot comics from July 29th, 2022. I'm recording this on January 27th, 2023. I give you those dates so you know when this information is actually relevant because the comic market is always moving and changing, and today's prices are not necessarily tomorrow's. So, as always, we're also looking back at the CBSI Hot Top 10 and the Comic Tom Key Collector Hottest Trending Comics of the Week. These are the two lists that I break down every week. Just kind of where I started. These were the lists that were really prominent, at least to me, when I first got into this. So those are still the two lists that I focus on. And we do this is because they give you a cross-examination of what books were hot, what based on comic news or whatever, that were selling rapidly and were jumping in value because of something going on in the marketplace. And we do this look back to try to understand what those factors were then, what's happened since, and in the 6 months, how much has that book moved? How much has it changed? If you were just a little bit patient, would that have paid off or not? You do know, if you've been watching this series, that in the boom of 21 has turned into a major downturn in 22 that has continued so far into 23, and patience definitely has paid off for the most part, even on some bigger books. So with that, we got 19 books to talk about this week. Let's dig into this list and find out what happened. First up, we have a book that's been on the list for the second week in a row. This was Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, number 1 from 1988. The first Dungeons and Dragons comic. This was on the list because we had our trailer for the movie, which I think comes out next week. So 6 months, you would think, oh, the movie, or not next week, but next month, you would think, oh, this book would still be super hot because the movie's coming. Back then, it was $25 to $40. 9.8 hit 360. Now it's 15 to 40. 9.8 hitting 300. So I thought this might actually be a trap. Turned into pretty steady, pretty much an I'll be back. It is down a little bit. You can definitely do better than back then, but it's kind of, most of the sales are the raw sales, and they are definitely through that same range. So we left it as a steady and an I'll be back on this one. Next, we're going to move into covers. Our first cover this week is Ant-Man number 1 from 2022, the David Baldeon 1 in 25. This 1 in 25 was going for 40 to 50, barely pushing double. That usually means it's a I'll be back, mostly a trap, probably. And yeah, the two sales that have happened recently are very much in the trap category. A raw for 30 and a 9.8 for 30. So yeah, this has definitely turned into a trap. Not many sales of this, not a lot of huge market for this. It is kind of a fun cover, but definitely not a huge market for it. Next, we have another book that's on the list for the second week in a row. This is The Mandalorian, number 1, the Adi Granov SDCC black and white variant. Last week it was around 140, and I said, it might be worth it. But then it jumped all the way up to when I was making the predictions. But by the second week on the list, it was up to 250, and at that point I was like, no, come back. I underestimated how much it was going to drop back. Now it's going for $100 on the raw side, 9.8 going for $400. A $150 drop on a $250 book, that is definitely into the dumpster fire category. Not a good investment if you chase this at the second week peak, which is usually the case. These books that hit the list twice, that second week is usually always high. No matter what the book is, it's always high. Next, we have Deathstroke Incorporated, number 11, the Ivan Tao 1 in 25. Back then, this was going for 35 to 40. Now it's 25 to 35. So this was a really cheap ratio. And it kind of just settled around ratio slightly above, which is actually a little better than I thought it might do. But there's only been a couple of sales. So that might be a little not super accurate just because of how few sales there are, but it's definitely still a down and an I'll be back. It did not become the trap, but definitely an I'll be back on this one. Next, our third repeat from last week. This is Black Adam number 2. This is the foil 1 in 50, first appearance of White Adam, the son of Black Adam. By week 2, it was going for 100 plus, which last week when we talked about it, it was at 75, so it was about ratio, not even double ratio. By this point, it was at 100 plus, so it was at least a double ratio. Didn't matter. Now it's an $80 to $90 book, so 9.8. But There was a recent 9.8 sale, went for 15 at auction, 15 plus shipping. So that definitely, you could argue somebody got a steal there, or that better represents the value because you're only talking about 3 sales. Definitely another down. I'll be back on the raw side, but I think you can argue this is actually really becoming a trap because people just aren't buying the current listing prices. With that as our last cover, we're going to move into a little bit of comic buzz. And first up on that side, we got Sacred Heart, a hero trade story, #1. Bad Idea was back. They had a book at San Diego Comic-Con. You could only get in the con at the con. Only 250 of them made. Back then, it was going for $525. Now it's at $125 to $250. So this has also become a dumpster fire. I said trap with capital letters back then in my notes. Yeah, Bad Idea was back and people were paying crazy prices and it didn't pay off again. Stunned. Next, we have Spawn Batman #1 from 1994. This hit the list because we got news that they were releasing a new Spawn Batman crossover in December. So yeah, that book is out now. Back then, raw copies were going for all of $10. 9.8 hit $170. And right now it's a $5 to $10 book. 9.8, $170. So yeah, this has just been super steady. I'll be back. It wasn't really a price jump back then. It was more of a just a bump in sales. So it didn't really jump price wise. It just really jumped in terms of a lot of sales back then. And the price is still basically the same at this point. So that's no big surprise. Next, we have X-Men #200. This hit the list because we got rumors that we know we're getting an X-Men 97 cartoon. They're reviving the 90s X-Men cartoon. And the storyline that they've basically hinted at, one of the storylines coming up is going to be the trial of Magneto, which is X-Men 200. Back then it caused books to jump all the way up to $10. 9.8 going for $180. Again, this had more to do with a 2,400% increase in sales because there was a trailer and it looked like this was going to happen. Yeah, now it's a $5 to $20 book. 9.8, $160. Another steady, I'll be back. It didn't jump a lot in terms of value back then, so the value is basically the same. It was really now. If you want to talk about the number of sales, those are obviously way down compared to the rate it was selling back then, but the price is the same. Next, we have Daredevil 227, the first issue of the Born Again storyline, and this hit the list because the title of the upcoming Daredevil show is going to be Born Again, which is kind of funny because we already got this storyline sort of in season 3 of Daredevil back when it was on Netflix, but this is their new thing. I think it's more about just using the title than it is going to be the story arc, but we'll see. But people were chasing this book. Raw copies were up to 25. 9.8 hit 400. Now it's a $15 to $40 book. 9.8, 250 to 300. So obviously down on the 9.8 side, but on the raw side, it's actually kind of steady worth it. Most of the sales are above the $25 mark that was the average back then. And most of the sales period are raw sales. So put this as a steady worth it. But yeah, again, I don't think these usually don't do well after the show comes and goes, but we'll see. Next, we have Namor the Submariner #1, the first issue of volume 6. Not sure why people were chasing this. We knew we were getting Namor for sure in Black Panther. So we'd gotten some news about that at San Diego Comic-Con. Raw copies were at $10. 9.8 was hitting 175 back then. Now it's literally a $1 to $10 book with most of the sales under $5, like $3 kind of thing. 9.8 going for 100. So yeah, this basically turned into a trap. Movie is come and gone. I know I actually enjoyed this movie quite a bit. I know there were some people that didn't, but definitely none of the books that really hit because of this movie or beforehand because of this movie have really sustained already. They've already come pretty much crashing back down. Speaking of which, we have Black Panther #8, the first appearance of Aniki? I forget how to pronounce it. They pronounce it in the movie and the show. I don't remember exactly. But we got her in the trailer, so that was why this book hit the list. It's one of the Dora Milaje, or Yeah. Anyway, back then raw copies were 25 to 30, 9.8 hit 260. Now it's a $5 to $15 book with most of the sales under $10. That's a dumpster fire. Also, she was in the movie. She played a modest role in the movie. We really need to stop chasing side characters that are gonna just make an appearance in these shows and movies. Those books do not tend to pay off at all. Next, Black Panther #3, the first appearance of Tosin. People were specking that we were going to get Tosin in the movie, despite because there was a boy shown, and they were like, "Oh, it's going to be Tosin." It was not Tosin. I know there was some similarity in the name, but it is that. Otherwise, there was no similarity in the two characters. Raw copies were going for 80 back then. Now it's a $40 to $60 book, 9.8, 125 to 150. So for a book that came out last year, a new character, 40 to 60, that's still a ton of value here. Just not as much as the crazy hype that's going on. It's definitely a trap from some of the highest points of when people were buying it last year. We'll see if maybe Tosin still becomes a great character in the comics, but people have definitely kind of overhyped this one, in my opinion. So I would probably still be patient on this one, but we'll see. Next, we got Astonishing Ant-Man #6, the first appearance of Cassie Lang as Stinger. These were people specking that might be her code name in the Ant-Man movie that's coming up. I think we found out now that it's going to be Stature, but I don't remember now. Maybe I got it backwards. But anyway, back then it was a $40 to $50 book. Now it's a $15 to $30 book, so it's definitely turned into a trap. 9.8 only cost you $140 to $150. Again, recent patterns here. So even if they were going to call her Stinger, recent patterns indicate this will probably still be down. Trailer hype and values have been higher recently than movie release values, and we're just a few days away, or a few weeks away from the movie, and yeah, this one is way down. Next, we have Tales of Suspense, #94, first appearance of MODOK, and if you know, this actually had just hit the list last week before, last week, I guess, when we got the trailer, the new Ant-Man trailer, and we saw MODOK for the first time. So this was back on the list again. This is one of those we got weird values. Back then, Tom was saying like an average of 770, and they had a 9.2 going for 1329. And this is when I really started investigating that. And what I found were raws were going for like 70 to 200. There was no 9.2 sale that was very recent. A 7.5 went for 475. There was like an 8.0 that went for 600. Now it's a 50 to 150 book on the raw side, even with the recent hype in the trailer, the image dropping in the trailer. 7.5, 4 to 440. So it's still an I'll be back from last summer, even with us getting our first look at MODOK in the most recent trailer. So that just, again, goes to the whole market just being down. Next, we have Avengers #41, the first issue of the Kang Dynasty storyline. This is another movie title or show title storyline hitting the list. But this was completely because it was a 1900% increase in sales. It was still only averaging $3. It's now a $3 to $15 book, 9.850. So I guess you could call it steady worth it. But just because there's more people thinking about the book because it kind of hit the list back then. But yeah, there's not a lot of value here, and there probably won't be, despite the fact that the movie is titled after this storyline. Next, still got 4 more books to go. Avengers 267, the first Council of Kangs. So back then, a 9.8 hit 350, which is still way down from the Loki hype when the Loki show dropped and we first got a version of Kang. This was still way down from that. Now it's even further down, 10 to 30 for a raw, 225 to 300 for a 9.8. So it's still down, and I'll be back even from that, the peak last summer, and that's also way down from the Loki show. So yeah, and we're about to get the movie, and it's still way down. So that just goes a reminder that the first time they're mentioned and get confirmation, that first trailer, those are much bigger hype, much bigger peaks, at least recently, than even the movie release itself. Unless it's a character that we didn't know was going to be in the movie, and then the movie gets a big peak. But otherwise, yeah, even the movie itself has been lower peaks over the last couple of years than the first initial, oh, we're getting this character kind of thing. So next we do have a true blue chip book here. This is Avengers 8, first appearance of Kang the Conqueror. This book, though, had also dropped 30 to 40% after the Loki show hype. This was a bump back, gained some of that back, but not all of it back then. 9.0, 8100, 7.0, 33, 3.5, 900. No recent 9.0 sales, at least on eBay that I can find, but 7.0 for 2,000. So that's a third drop. So that's trap territory on a 7.0. 3.5, 6 to 700. That's borderline trap. I don't know why I wrote I'll be back, but I did. Raw copies 2 to 1,200. I mean, obviously, long term, this is a straight cash book, but the initial hype of getting Kang versus the weeks before we're actually going to get Kang, and this book is still way down from those heights. So again, a function of the market itself, but also just a change in the way, which is maybe also a function of the market, but just a change in the reaction of the market to the movies actually coming out. So even though I think long term, if you buy this first appearance of Kang during some of the peaks, long term you'll be fine. But here's short term. If you were hoping to buy it then and then flip it now, yeah, that didn't work out so well. Finally, we got 2 books left, also based on MCU news coming out of San Diego Comic-Con. We got Secret Wars #1. This is from 2015. And this is just basically because we got the title of the movie. We're going to get a Secret Wars movie. Back then, raw copies were going for $5, 9.8 going for $3.50. Now it's a $5 to $10 book, which is just being I'll be back, which is most of the sales are also raw, but 9.8s are going for $40 to $70. So if you paid that $3.50, that's a dumpster fire to the extreme. On a 9.8 backup, that is huge loss there. So you think, oh, well, that's the newer Secret Wars. The original probably did better. That is our last book, Marvel Superheroes Secret Wars #1 from 1984. Obviously, our first Secret Wars book. Back then, a 9.8 hit 1,000 plus. We're hitting 9.8s. We're going for over 1,000. Now 9.8s are doing 350 to 425. That's a pretty easy math. That's a 65% drop. Raw copies 15 to 50. So yeah, that's another dumpster fire. So again, the announcements, avoid the announcements. So, all right, those are our 19 books. I want to thank you guys for hanging out with me again this week. I appreciate you guys watching, and we'll catch you next time.